Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here, and we'll be continuing, but we should probably be finishing Rupa's Doha Kosha, uh, and there will also probably be some good time for questions and answers, should that be needed. Um, and maybe as a way of beginning, we can sit for approximately maybe we'll do 12 minutes just as a way to make sure that there's plenty of time for us to be able to check in towards the end if that feels good. So, as we've been doing, allow yourself to rest with your body resting like a mountain, stability. And allow your breath to be natural. It is helpful for one's eyes to be open. So, if you can begin to orient around practicing with one's eyes open, and as you do, let your gaze be focused on non-referential space itself, not specifically drilling down into a physical object that you might see. Let your mind be free and supple, natural, like wind or clouds, like birds flying in the sky, fish. And try and allow yourself to let go for 3 times, releasing yourself. Past, releasing yourself from the future, and releasing yourself even from this moment. Releasing yourself from the need to control anything. Releasing yourself from the need to figure anything out, know what is happening. And just resting freely and openly, dynamically into the mind's essential nature. For 11 minutes. possible. All right, here we are. So yeah, we'll be able to finish this song today, and um, for some who may not know, I just got out on Saturday of a 8-day dark retreat, and I'm happy also maybe to answer some questions if there are any of those about that particular practice too, even though it's not specifically 100% on topic with us, but I want to be able to kind of broach this mysterious topic of Yanti Yoga practice. But so first we'll attend to the things that need attending to, and Virupa's Dohakosha is the thing. So where we left off was the first stanza of the third section, the portion dealing with the Mahamudra Samaya, right? And so, just use the poisonous word Samaya. What does that mean? And in this particular case, it's not, this kind of Samaya, the tantric Samaya we need to freak out about, having received the highest yoga tantra empowerment from somebody. This really has much more to do with resting into the open, settled relationship to what Mahamudra is, right? So Samaya is a commitment. What is the commitment to? The commitment is to the maintenance of awareness, right? So this commitment to the maintenance of awareness is not something we need to be afraid of. And so we covered this first stanza, but I'm just going to repeat it so that we have a little bit of flow. And so Virupa says, we may have conviction that we are a Buddha, and still we accumulate optimal merit. We are bold and fearless in samsara, and we still avoid the slightest negative act, right? And so this is, I think the way I mentioned it last time we were together 2 weeks ago was, actually through this expression that came apparently from Guru Rinpoche, which is to keep your view as vast as space itself, and your conduct as fine as the finest sample flower, right? So in the context of developing a relationship to, say, the heart of non-dual awareness, the kind of the practitioner who lacks a certain element of thoughtfulness or maturity will then make these large blanket statements about there's no such thing as good and bad. I can do whatever I want, and then they'll go off and do whatever they want just because they've had a little bit of taste of sweetness of non-duality. And the point here is that what Virupa is saying is that even if one has had the experience of Mahamudra, right, then and when we have this conviction that we are the Buddha, not meaning that we're delusional, but meaning that we recognize our natural wakefulness, right? That we recognize that we are essentially exactly the same as the Buddha, we still accumulate optimal merit, right? This means that we still engage in compassionate activity. We still engage in the work of benefiting others. We still engage in, whatever it is needed to be able to make lives of other beings, whether hominid or animalian, or insect, or viral, bacterial, to alleviate the suffering of all of these beings, ghosts, demons, etc. And that while we're bold and fearless in samsara, right, we still avoid the slightest negative act. And why is this, right? So this is not based on the fact necessarily, at this point of being able to recognize that, we are the essence of fundamental wakefulness. It's not specifically necessarily the case that this is about our own falling back out of an awakened state, although there could be some of that. This is more about really not causing boatloads of harm, right, and destabilizing the minds of folks around us, right? and we don't have to look very far to find, examples in Dharma communities where this, the kind of critical care component of this has not necessarily been followed well. So while a teacher may have a tremendous amount of insight, perhaps their activity is unskillful and harm is created in a community. Harm is created within the minds and experiences of practitioners. And that is of course, not optimal. Right? That is not helpful. So moving on to the next stanza, he says, we perceive all phenomena as empty, boundless and limpid as the sky, and we resist all preferences and partialities. And so, this is basically as we begin to kind of open up to this experience of one taste, right? That all phenomena are basically of the same nature. We let go of preferences. We let go of, in essence, attachment and aversion. And it's worth beginning to open up now, even if we haven't, experienced the yoga of one taste, as it's often called in Mahamudra. This experience of the fact that everything is of the same nature, it becomes helpful for us to be able to begin to let go of attachment and aversion, right? To let go of hope and fear. And attachment is a really interesting thing. And so what I'm going to do is say that within this context, I want to invite everybody to really feel into attachment and the way you experience it. And then there's the obvious kind of like, oh, this purba is so nice, I'm attached to its mind. Don't take it, don't look at it, don't even like think of coming here and stealing it. And no, I'm not going to give it to you. So like there's that kind of attachment. That's really kind of basic attachment, right? But this idea sometimes that we have this experience of wanting a particular moment to last just a little bit longer. So spending time with a loved one, friend, dharma sibling, and really enjoying that connection. And it's great, right? Wonderful experience. And when it's time for that person to leave or us to leave, wanting it to last longer, that's a form of attachment. Our creature comforts. Sitting, it's snowing lightly outside today, although in other parts of the Northeast it's probably snowing quite a bit. And after this class, a little bit after this class, I'm going to have to go out and pick up my kids. And it's really windy outside. And so there's a sense of attachment of, oh, it's nice and cozy here. Let me not have to go outside and wait outside the wind. Parents for all these kids. I'm going to be here. That's a form of attachment. So really beginning to kind of feel into our relationship to preference and partiality, wanting, controlling, leading. Okay? Remember this practice of Mahamudra, the experience of Mahamudra is very similar to the practice of Hatha Yoga, where there's what we're like is just a flow, right? Just letting everything come and go. We don't need to control. We don't need to hold on. We don't need to push away. Just let it go. Let it go. And so there's a samaya in this context because it becomes part of the conduct, right? Part of the conduct of being a yogini. The Mahamudra tradition is to be a yogini of space. And to be a yogini of space is to be a yogini without attachment and aversion, without hope and fear, without partiality, without preference. So the next smaya is we reach the end of dualistic possibility, and lacking anything to hold on to, we do not boast. I don't have, I'm sorry, can everybody else hear me? Yes? Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna have to go with that. I don't have headphones here at this time. I apologize for that. So, we can have the most profound experience of non-duality, right? This experience of rigpa, this experience of non-attachment. And even in this most profound experience, we don't boast, right? This is not a show, we're not showing off. This is not what the practice is about. The practice is about being part of the larger nature of the expression, the creativity of the universe. There's nothing, this is not about me, mine. This is not about me start saying names. It's not about Gail and Jan or Jan. It's not about Rodrigo. It's not about Aliyah or Gendon, Albert, Shumi, or Richard, right? This is not about each one of us, and I'm, achieving this. This is mine, We have to get away from this kind of very weird, tight way of thinking, right? So, whatever profound experience, the Samaya of silence, the Samaya of not boasting, the Samaya of not being some kind of, person who runs out into the fields or into the middle of the town square and is like, I am Mahamudra, I have the city of Mahamudra, I have the city of basic space, I have the city of blah, blah, blah. Right. And where this is interesting is the spiritual marketplace, right? So in the spiritual marketplace, everybody wants to, be a master. Everybody wants to be, everyone wants to be something, right? And the fine balance here, especially within the context of this, unusual culture we find ourselves in, is how to be able to hold deep spiritual experience without, turning it into some kind of, marketing ploy, where we're selling a line of, clothing, monastic experience, or come, take my 12-step program, or come, receive this training and blah blah blah. Right? Just letting, again, like there's nothing extraordinary about Mahamudra. There's nothing extraordinary about Dzogchen. There's nothing extraordinary about your own awakening and our collective awakening. Right? We don't need to go, to the ends of the earth and market ourselves and become boastful, etc. So this is why this is a Samaya, right? Remembering too, right, that Virupa was a great yogi, right? And so within this context of yogic practice, there is a relationship to discipline, right? I was talking with one of my teachers in January, and I had gone through a slightly, how would I describe it? A slightly like intense experience. Let's just put it that way. And so I was talking with my teacher about it, and they're like, well, do you want my advice? And I was like, yes, sure. And they're like, okay, you're a yogi, right? And I'm like, yeah. And their point was, well, deal with it. Like, effing practice into it, right? Like, make it your practice, right? That's it. That's all there is, right? All of this is always our practice. So when we're like, oh, and then it should be raining white flowers and red flowers and dakinis flying through the air, and all these dakas holding these like wine jugs up to our lips, and the nectar of all of the empowerments of all the Buddhas, of all the 3 times 10 directions should be coming into my mouth. Then just like, let me just sit, like, let me not be super manic about this. Like, let me not freak out, and again, this is hard because the first time, we begin to have some positive experiences, yeah, we're going to want to go run and tell people all of this. And, we're not the first people this has happened to. Let's put it this way. And we're not going to be the last, right? So, so don't boast. So the next smile, and these are kind of getting shorter and shorter. We realize that when we realize that self and other are non-dual, we aspire to benefit other beings. Right? This is really key. I've met some very unusual people in my day, especially in these parts of my life or times of my life where I spent a lot of time, like in Bodh Gaya and other places, like, and I would meet all sorts of people who had left the West to go to the East to learn, how to practice. And many of them were really, focused on these non-dual practices, and that's great. And they were also incredibly nasty and harsh and mean and intense, and not necessarily because essentially they felt that uh, they were above it all, right? And we have to remember our impact. We have to remember this. Who here has ever been in like a bad situation? It doesn't have to be super traumatic, right? It doesn't have to be really, 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 really intense. But this moment where maybe we reach out to somebody we respect, right? Somebody who we need some guidance from or some help, right? And they're able to help us, right? They meet us right where we are. Maybe they don't necessarily offer us the most profound thing, but it's even just the response itself, right? This element of care and compassion. And just sometimes the receipt of a response is enough to make us feel like, oh God, all right, like this person who I really respect sees me and they recognize me, right? And um, I can keep going, or they respond with a really great response, and it's really they take their time, and that's even better, right? But if you ever reached out to someone like that and they were like, well, the feelings you're feeling, you shouldn't be feeling because you just need to rest into the nature of mind, and that's it, right? Or they send an even more rude response, right? Where it's just like, well, come back to me when you're not suffering. Come back to me when you're awake. Come back to me when you realize the nature of mind. That's not particularly helpful either, right? So really feeling into the fact that um, how we carry ourselves impacts others, but it does even more than that. It impacts sometimes the way people relate to Dharma. And you see this all the time nowadays, where, amidst a lot of these, scandals we find in a lot of Buddhist communities, some people just say, well, you know what? I'm not practicing at all. You know, these people are showing me this huge discrepancy where the Dharma says this, their own teachings say that, and their own activities say this other thing. And that doesn't feel good to me. That doesn't feel safe to me. That doesn't feel like a good example to me. You can't fault people for having that kind of reaction. And so this means that there is a kind of double responsibility or an onus of responsibility on the practitioner of Mahamudra to be able to actually hold space properly. Right? And that is not easy to do. Right? And yet this, especially for Rupa, is a samaya, right? It is a way of being able to hold to a sense of conduct that is responsible, that is beneficial, that does this twofold thing. It both honors and is in alignment with the non-dual nature of Mahamudra, which transcends all of religion, and it also meets the dictates of Buddhist ethics, right? Because sometimes these things actually don't meet. And so what Rupa is saying is, we have to make these meet, right? We have to make these meet because this allows us to not unintentionally hurt others, right? It allows us to not unskillfully destabilize others. There are times where being destabilized is important, right? Where we need to get kind of pushed a little bit out of our myopia, out of our kind of cyclic brokenness or smallness, right? And so sometimes a little bit of destabilization helps us to be able to kind of see past that, right? But again, it takes a really skillful teacher to be able to do that well, right? And so, Baruch is really pointing out the importance of showing up properly for people. Then the last of the smiles is our conviction is strong, a guide redundant, and we still keep the kind Lama above our head, right? So when our practice is such that the Lama of the awakened nature of mind is really what we're reacting with, the guru of the vastness and totality of Rigpa is where we're at in our practice, right? And perhaps we are no longer really typically on a daily basis relying on the instructions of our kind of, physical teachers. It's still holding our teachers with respect, still holding, this appreciation for the flow of lineage. Right? And this is important too. This is not because, we're like slaves in a system that is, meant to keep us down, right? This is really about respect, right? And this comes more, I don't know if I'll say this correctly, but this relationship to learning and lineage is more strongly rooted in non-Western cultures, right? Where the kind of Western culture is like, I got the diploma, like, screw you guys, like, and now I'm the expert. I get paid a lot of money. You guys can all get out of here, right? With this, it's really like, sometimes it's described as one teacher pouring their dharma into the cupped hands of the student practicing the dharma, and then eventually them, pouring the nectar of dharma into the next person and the next person, and it just keeps going. And so this relationship, it becomes a heart relationship. Right? And this is something that, especially in our day and age, I see less and less of. I see more Dharma teachers getting upset with their teachers and leaving and saying, I'm going to go it alone, and it's not the thing that they're breaking necessarily this lineage that's the problem, but it's the headstrongness, right? It's the like, I can go it alone. I can't go it alone. I need all of my teachers to their blessings, their openness, their wisdom, even the ones who have passed away, right? That relationship is still there. Right? And so this is particularly helpful and perhaps particularly difficult for Dharma practitioners now in the West, where the assumption is, because of our kind of American exceptionalism in particular, like we can go it alone. I don't need to rely on anybody. I don't like the vulnerability of having somebody who is my teacher, right? I don't want that. Oh, I understand that. And like we should note the time when Rupa lived, right? So Rupa lived, roughly 9th century, 8th century, 9th century, right? And so this has been the tradition since then, right? Does this need to be thrown out? No. Do we need to sometimes swallow our own pride? Yes. Does that suck? I'm sorry, but it does. And too bad. We just need to kind of get over ourselves sometimes, right? Like there's this point, like in dark retreat practice, that's a very visionary practice, right? But all of these lamas come in this visual experience of coming, dissolving into you, coming and occupying space, right? And what if I was just like, you know what, man, like, thank you, but no thank you. Like, I'm good. Like, I don't know why you would do that. Like, I don't know why any one of us would just say, you know what, like, I got this. Like, I don't need all this. I don't need all of you who came before me. Like, I don't need, I was thinking a little bit, about the, like the phrase or term chosen family, like especially like in LGBTQ culture, right? And the importance of chosen family as actually like a form of refuge, so to speak, for people to be able to be seen and heard and nurtured and understood by people who are able to see and nurture and understand them, especially in light of a culture that is grossly you know not willing to support LGBTQ culture. And it then made me think of like that's a really beautiful way of describing lineage, like our chosen family. So like I tend to think, and I have always thought of like, Ani Zangmo is my spiritual mother, right? Boku Rinpoche is my spiritual father. Patrick Rinpoche is my spiritual grandfather, right? And every other teacher who I've ever met as a chosen father, chosen mother, chosen aunt, chosen, whatever. Like, but this is important, right? Like there is a thread, and it's not like a thread we need to worry about cutting so much. But I have definitely heard stories, and I have been warned by many teachers about not cutting the line, that thread line, that heart line of lineage, right? And of course, this gets a little complicated sometimes around the idea of Samaya and around the idea of independence. But it really, this kind of heart lineage thing transcends time, it transcends space, it transcends identity, it transcends everything, right? This is the thing that can allow you, like any one of us here, and on Pi Day, all days, in 2023, to be able to be practicing and feel a direct heart connection to somebody who lived in the 8th century, or a direct heart connection to somebody who lived 100 years ago, who we never met, because there are these heart threads, right? And so remembering that, right? It's not all here. Like it's not all in the university level, Dharma class, right? It's not all in divinity schools, right? It's not all in intellect. It's not all in your encyclopedia. It's not in Google. It's not in Wikipedia. It's not in any of that stuff. It's all in the heart. Like these heart connections are really, what transcend time and space. Right. So this was the Mahamudra Samayas. And next come the oral instructions on the outcome. The perfection of Mahamudra can be divided into temporary and ultimate. Right? And so, result in the moment. Right? What is the result like in the moment? So he describes the result as no one to see and nothing even to be seen. Such distinctions fall away. Practitioner and practice dissolve. No effort or success. No goal to attain. Hopes and fears disperse. No self to uproot. All the demons are defeated. No belief in a reality. No samsara or nirvana. Right? So the way, the kind of, as you could say, the manifestation of the view arises in practice, right? Like fully manifests is in this way. That there's no binary between observer, in this particular case, Justin, and everything to be seen, whether all apparent phenomena in this room or all of the faces right here. Right? Practitioner and practice. Oh, here I am, self-consciously practitioner. Right? That's self-consciousness dissolves, right? Everything is just, immediate in the moment. No goal to attain. Oh, recite all of these prayers, Mahamudra aspiration prayer. May I realize it, may I realize it, may I realize it, may I realize it, may I realize it. Stop and realize it. Stop. And again, this is the interesting thing, the audacity of Tilopa's 6 nails. Let go of the future. Let go of a hope. Let go of grabbing. And when we're able to let go, usually, of this grasping, of this attachment, of this desire for everything to be absolutely, manifest in this incredible way, something actually begins to manifest. We need to let go. We need to let go. This is, really good for Americans. We need to let go. We need to stop controlling. Americans in particular need to stop trying to control the universe and the metaverse and their own mind and other people's minds and people's bodies and the way people think and the work people do and what people get paid. Today's, what is it? Today's, I can't remember the term of the day, but today's the marking. There's, I guess, officially on the books, there's no division, should be no division between what men and women make in the US, right? It's 2023 and today's the day that's finally like law. Wow. Right, so these are the results in the moment, right? No self to uproot, right? We're no longer fighting. We're no longer irritated with ourselves. We're no longer sad that, oh, I'm not an enlightened teacher. We're not sad about, this or that. We're just who we are, warts and all, whatever. What are we going to do? Content. Or as I once said to somebody, like we're not thirsty or hungry anymore. We're sated, comfortable in our own skin, comfortable in our own, experience of mind, or comfortable in our relationship to phenomena. No belief in a reality. This was great. I was thinking about this actually. Last night. I mean, and again, Dark Retreat practice really has his way of kind of like drilling this particular point home. Just as much as, we might have chosen family, we have chosen reality. And the chosen reality that we have is, big thing is it's chosen and it's not real. Right? And so recognizing that and having this ability to rest into the fact that this reality that I assume, this reality that I project, is not real. Once we can actually feel this, the sense of space and relief and energy and freedom for creative response is so profound. It's so good. And it's such a balm. It's love. It's natural compassion. There's no, you can't eat this on Fridays. You can't dress that way. You can't use these words. You can't, observe your religion this particular way. You need to do it this other way. You need to do all this. This one particular gender can't do all this stuff. Can't drive a car. All this weird stuff, right? Like we as humans, I wrote this down in notes from my retreat. Like our suffering is in concept. Like we just latch right on and then have this way of just trying to force every other being and reality itself to conform to the concept. The mastery of Mahamudra and the mastery of Bhakti Yoga lead us to this place of letting that go. It's as if to say, it doesn't matter. Just let it go. And so the timeless result is awareness, pure in its own ground. That is perfect enlightenment. Phenomenon and intellect consumed. That is nirvana. No contrivance, no change. That is release from all bias. I'm going to say this again. Awareness, pure in its own ground. That is perfect enlightenment. No projections. No conceptual busy work. No forcing things to be a way, positive, negative. This is kind of, along the lines of this idea of radical acceptance. Awareness, pure in its own ground, is perfect enlightenment. Phenomena and intellect consumed. That is nirvana. Intellect. Yuck. Oh, it's nasty. Nasty intellect. Right? All the ideas. Oh, so smart. So smart. So smart. All we are animals. Right? And we're animals who have the potential curse of constantly thinking and thinking and thinking and projecting and saying Sarah should do this, and Gendon should do that, and Hector should do this, and Larry should do that. Everybody, Remy should do this. Jamie should do that. You have to do it because I thought it. And because as a group, we thought it together. When we die and books fall apart, those concepts won't remain. Those concepts were never there. No contrivance, no change. This is the release from all bias. Right? So what is the thing that remains? Awareness. So there's nothing to be attached to, nothing to push away. And it's one thing to be really timid around these things and be like, oh, well, it's easy for Rupa to say that because, Rupa is such an incredible yogi and he was fearless and all of this stuff. And okay, I hear that. I've thought that too. And there's another part of us that's like, I'm tired. I'm really tired. I'm super tired of constantly suffering. Most days we wake up and we get thrown right. Who throws us into it? Not our neighbors, not our partners, not our kids, but us. Well, if I had everything right and all the circumstances were perfect, I would be in retreat all the time. See all these people holding me down? My family, my friends, my social location, the man. Why don't I have all the money? Because of the man. Who is holding you down? There is no man. There is no social location. There is no family. There are no loved ones. You have no partner. It's always the same thing. You just have awareness. And so this whole thing of just letting ourselves go, letting ourselves go and taking ourselves seriously and really practicing into this, really saying, well, if Rupa could do it, I could do it. If Yeshut Sogyal could do it, I can do it. Nobody's holding you back. You are not anything less. Each one of us has the same nature. Each one of us has the exact same seed. Each one of us has exactly the same potential. There's no person, thing, or being is better than another. No person or thing or being has more Buddha nature than another. We all ought to just listen and step into that. Step into that with confidence. And to say, okay, I'm going to actually try and put this into practice. Why? Because this morning I woke up suffering. Or chances are by the end of the day, by the time we go to sleep, there will be some element of suffering, some bittersweet quality. Maybe not even sweet, just bitter. And so now we move into this next portion, the inseparability of the two truths. Abaho. However, we know it is a great Mahamudra, or however, we know it is a great Mahamudra, or is it emptiness? Grand words, but just words. Instant after instant, all empty of essence. And what self is there to realize it? None at all. Thus, Buddha is only a word without any importance, an expression for devotees and academics. Right? So, like, what he's pushing us towards is, sometimes we'll say, well, like, is, I'm not even going to go down there, but I was going to say, like, is Rupa Shangtam or is he Ramtam? If Rupa was here, would he practice Gelug style or Kaju style or Nyingma style, or would he be Theravada? Would he be Sakya? What would you think of Zen? Blah, 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 right? Like, that's not the point. It's not the point. Would he agree with Bernie Sanders? Or would he agree with Bernie Madoff? Blah, 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 blah. That doesn't matter either. There's no self to realize, Mahamudra or Madhyamaka or Ati. So why go there? The Buddha is only a word without importance, an expression for devotees and academics. Okay? Just some person who may have lived, may not have lived, who knows, right? What point does it have, right? If I say the Buddha didn't exist, does that mean you have any less Buddha nature, right? No. If I say the Buddha existed, do you have any more Buddha nature than you did before? No. Like, that's not the point. A magical shell, an empty display. Mahamudra is a word for unripe minds. Deluded and undiluted are empty words. For who is present to experience delusion, nirvana, the result? Not so much as a trace. For who is present to make an objective search? Likewise, freedom and bondage are both delusory. There is no you. There is no me. There is no path. There is no external form of this. Just being, just resting into pure being. Open being, the being of radical acceptance, being of ease. Any path to liberation is redundant. Quiet space and pure realm are fantasy. Momentary and timeless are logical labels. And in reality expanse, there can be no truths and no reality. Right, so the path, like having an additional path to realization outside of this, what is it? We can have this, sorry, Lam joke alert. We can have this, slow, long path, which is, I mean, product of a slow, long mind, maybe, I don't know. Or it could just be like that. But holding on to one over the other is not in alignment with Mahamudra practice. Like pushing one down the steps for the other is not in alignment with Mahamudra practice. Getting wrapped up in the constancy of, well, is that ultimate reality or relative reality? That ultimate emptiness or relative emptiness? This is like, somebody who's starving being offered the choice of two foods. And they're like, and they're like literally starving. They're like, well, I wonder which one. Like, which one is better? It's like, well, I would venture to guess you're not really starving. If you're like, well, I don't know. Like, do I want like, the savory or the sweet? I'm not sure. Which one is better? I don't know. Maybe I'll spend the day thinking about it, while somebody else steals the food. And I think the last point, like kind of connected to this, is that if we're going to orient ourselves around, non-dual practice, especially in this particular case, Mahamudra, but it's the same goes for Hatha Yoga, that we need to really be thorough in the application of the non-dual view, right? There's not a lot of benefit in saying I'm practicing non-duality and I'm going to apply some other view to this, right? And it's not to say other views don't matter or other views are wrong, but why get involved in creating endless complexity? Because we know we can, right? As humans, we can engage in all sorts of complexity, right? But we don't need to. And it kind of goes back to this expression that an interior decorator taught me a long time ago, which is just because you can doesn't mean you should. About the way you design your apartment, right? The decor you pick out. Well, just because you can do that doesn't mean you should. Right? Just because you can create a fabulously complex, hallucinatory religious path when there is no such thing doesn't mean you should. Doesn't mean you need to. You can just be right here, being in this space, being in these parts of darkness. So, and that's where the text ends. And it says this Doha in Sanskrit, the Doha Kosha, Nama in Tibetan, the Doha Zod, was composed by the great yogi Rupa. It was translated into Tibetan by the Indian master Bharat. So yeah, maybe we could see if there are any questions that people may have, or thoughts or fears or thoughts of rage. You can raise your hand, you can put something in the chat box, or you can just shout it out. Or we can sit around and feel awkward, just stare at each other. What is dark retreat and how do I do it? Okay. So, the practice of dark retreat is being in complete darkness, like 24/7, for a period of time. And like the normal or usual kind of time frames are 7 days, sometimes as long as 49 days. And there's a series of, it exists in a number of different contexts, but in the context of Dzogchen, there's a series of practices that one does, as kind of styles of gazing that you do in the complete darkness, and these help influence these kind of experiences of vision, or they help kind of curate or guide or cause to come into being particular kinds of visions that then you end up quote unquote experiencing, quote unquote working with, while resting in the nature of mind itself. So like Remy, you're in the Mirror of Light program, and so that program, is going to get us to this practice of trekcho, which is just resting freely and openly into the nature of mind. And so then you rest freely and openly into the nature of mind and appearance, but your it's kind of like an atmosphere of sensory deprivation, and so all this visual phenomenon comes, and we engage this as a way of being able to better understand the nature of appearance, so everything that's seen and experienced, and then also to be able to move closer and closer to, you could say, directly experiencing Rigpa as it is. And it's an incredibly powerful way of introducing that experience. And it's also a kind of dangerous practice because it's a little potentially dangerous, at least, because it's a lot happens, right? A lot of really intense visionary experience can happen, and if we are not prepared, it can lead to a psychological destabilization. It can, in some cases, lead to psychosis. It could be, it could be very terrifying. And of course, one can leave whenever they need, but it's a kind of practice that requires a good deal of kind of preparation. The best preparations being practices like Mahamudra and Trekcha, right? Really understanding one's own mind, really understanding, what arises within our experience of both mental, so it can be emotional, but also spiritual phenomena arising, and being able to let everything come and let everything just naturally dissipate, right? But if we're in our practice where something comes, anger, sadness, whatever, and we do get knocked down by it, then that's that means we're not ready, because it's particularly can be particularly challenging. So yeah, was that helpful? Yeah. There are going to be two, for those in the New York City area where I don't know anybody who is here, unless I'm totally mistaken. There are going to be two workshops I'm going to do at the Rubin Museum of Himalayan art in New York, one on the 22nd of April and one on the 6th of May, that are, we're working to kind of create a simulation of a dark retreat experience in the auditorium there. So there'll be like, it's kind of like a half day program. We'll start off with a tour of the Lukang murals, which were these murals painted for the fifth Dalai Lama, that show depictions of various different kinds of practices, including some dark retreat practice. So I'll give a little bit of a tour of the museum there, and then we'll go down to the auditorium. We've created this kind of simulated experience of being in dark retreat. So being in darkness, we'll be in complete darkness for 15 minutes, and then all these images from the museum's collection slowly fade into space, and dissipate, and then fade into space, and dissipate, and fade into space, and dissipate. So it'll be interesting. It's never been done before there. They never had a program on it, dark retreat. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Yeah. What else? Thoughts, feelings.
Oh, I have a question.
Oh yes, yeah.
Something I've struggled with, this idea of non-duality and social justice. So this feeling of, well, if I fully embraced it, I'd just be passive, which is a classic, I guess, critique of Buddhism. And I'm just wondering what how you hold your commitment to social justice, but also not being reactive, but also holding both what is with as much clarity as you can, and also what ought to be, and not, I guess, also being committed to something which ought to be,
Yeah. No, this is a good topic. It's complicated, and I also don't think that there's one answer, right? I mean, there's many answers as there are people. One thing that's interesting is, and I don't mean this about you, Jamie, but the interesting thing about the question is that there's an assumption that there's something wrong with being passive, right? And I think that's worth exploring. Passivity has a lot of really beautiful strengths. Right? One of the strengths of passivity is receptivity, right? Listening, watching, hearing, understanding my own reactivity as it happens. Yeah, also understanding the limitation of my own reactivity, my own anger. Sometimes anger is a great thing that motivates people, definitely. Anger around in the United States, for example, racial or gender inequality, for example, right? Anger around that motivates people to get up and do something about it. Anger around the climate crisis. But then there's also, when anger becomes destabilizing to us ourselves, when anger eats us, when anger consumes us, when anger shuts us down, when it sucks up all the air in the room, when it paralyzes us. So for me, like, I think I'm a fairly active person. I do a lot. I get around. But I really enjoy being passive. Like, I've learned to love being slow, as slow as I can be. Right? And because there's wisdom in this. So I think that there's sometimes even greater wisdom in slowing down a little bit and having a passive read on what's really, needs to be addressed. And this allows us to be a little bit more skillful in where we direct our energy, how we direct, our activity, etc. And so I'm going to say something that whatever, I'm just going to say something. I don't think this whole thing, I have a nice little ribbon here. It's like rainbow ribbon. I don't think that we can wrap everything together with a nice bow. Like, Dharma practice does not exclude social justice. And Dharma practice is not only about social justice, right? And it's not because social justice has a limitation, right? And it's not because Dharma has a limitation. But I do think it is partially because of control. I don't think we can necessarily control as much as we want to control. We want to control a lot. I understand that. I'm a parent. Right? I've wanted to control, especially my oldest son. He went through a really rough time, in his adolescence. Really, 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 really hard. And yeah, I wanted to control the heck out of his life so he would not go through these periods of self-harm and these periods of intense, confusion and hardship and pain and suffering. And I think this is the thing that my chaplaincy experiences have taught me is, working in hospice. Well, all you can do in these situations is be present to death, right? And grief, and be as loving a supportive presence for people going through that. or my work, even on Rikers Island, where, in the New York City jail system, I mean, and it still is like constantly on fire, constantly so many people being hurt, injured, harm being propagated and repropagated, trauma being, laid on top of trauma, on top of trauma, on top of trauma. And I just tried to show up and be. I could, if I could control the system, yeah, sure, I would like to try and do that, right? But would I know what's best for such a complex intersectionality of people? No, like I wouldn't have. Everything from the war in Ukraine to the environmental crisis, I want to control it all. And I know I'm not the only one. I know a lot of people here want to control the outcomes of these things. And we can't even control our minds. Like we can't control our relative stability. And we need to be pretty honest, right? And so this doesn't mean, well, if you can't control your mind, then like let's just let this whole thing go to hell. Right, but maybe trying to understand for ourselves like what it is that we are trying to do is helpful. This world system will not last at all. And one thing, at least the Buddhist tradition says, is that it won't. Nothing will. Neither will we. And this also doesn't mean, well, then on not, for that reason, like I'm going to start drinking forever chemicals and like, mainlining, heroin and just, I give up. Let's have a big party, It's not that either, right? Many of our problems, environmental problem in particular, is collective. And human greed and human consumption and capitalism and all of these things are coming together in a perfect storm. Not only that, the human relationship to nature, that where nature, we do nature's bidding, right? We own Mother Nature. We take from Mother Nature what it is that we need, etc. That helped get us here. And we still have this when it's hot. We buy an air conditioner. We buy the most efficient air conditioner we could possibly get, right? But we still have them. So I guess all of this is to say is like we need to be able to balance for ourselves like what the justice issues are and where we are as people who relate to making the world a better place, a more compassionate place. And I think kind of going back to Rupa's Samaya section of Mahamudra, it becomes important to not judge, right, what we see the next person doing. Because there are many ways of making a difference. Right? Sometimes it's being that compassionate presence as a therapist, right? Or as a parent. Right? As a parent in particular, trying to raise one's kids to be open, dynamic, who think differently. And there are some people who put their lives on the line. There are some people who make change through massive wealth. The thing is, right, much like everything else, I don't think we can really dictate the terms externally, especially if we can't dictate the terms about what this reality is, quote unquote, out there and in here. It's interesting. I definitely know I don't have the answer. Um, but I also know enough to not trust the rage. I don't trust that. I don't trust the strong reactions. I feel people's strong reactions, and I will have my own strong reactions, definitely at times. But the one thing I know is that my anger has never saved anything. My own anger, um, I'm not skillful with that. Where my skill lay is trying to, maybe propagate Mahamudra and yoga. Like that's activism for me, right? Helping people's minds get free of binary ways of thinking and being. And I think that's an important thing to remember too, is like, what form does this activism take? It's not all the same. They can't be the same, right? We all have different experiences, different relationships to power, different relationships, different experiences at the hands of power, right? Different experiences, in the ways that we're embodied. Different kinds of violence we create by labeling people because of the way that we think they're embodied. Oh, you're this, you're that. You think this way because of that. If we're going to really practice Mahamudra, then we need to find a sadhana of Mahamudra of social justice. Because we can't take an Abrahamic stance here and practice Mahamudra there. Like some stuff needs to go at some point. At some point we need to, let go. Like at some point we need to kind of clean up our own shop a little bit and get consistent with our relationship to non-duality. And the interesting thing about non-duality is that it scares us, right? Non-duality is scary because there is, what if there is no Raja? What if there is no samsara and nirvana? Why is that scary? Why is that uncomfortable? Why is that destabilizing? Because the funny thing is like, again, from the perspective of Rupa and from the perspective of, let's say, Guru Rinpoche, Geshe Tsogyal, in their case, everything has been completely pure from the beginning. Right? If everything's been completely pure from the beginning, then can we hold that while we do the work? Or do we need to see the existence of non-duality as an inconsistency in relationship to our own preconceived ideas about what the work of social justice is? So I guess what I'm trying to point out is that I don't think, I think the Vajrayana tradition in particular is way at the bottom of, having done any real good work in implementing the Vajrayana views into this kind of work. Like the Zen tradition and the Theravadan tradition have done a much better job at this, primarily because they've been doing it for longer, is all. Like that's the thing. The Vajrayana world, up until recently, has been so tight-fisted with trying to share with a much wider world, global culture, how to perhaps address some of these issues. Right? So we're only beginning to do it now. And so because we're only beginning to do it now, like, there's so much to do. But I think that one of the things that's worth considering is revisioning what if we if we make these aspiration prayers to be able to experience and manifest the non-dual view, we have to begin doing it now with the work we do. Non-dual view means there are no villains. Non-dual view means we're working with appearance. Non-dual view means we have to find the wisdom in rage. Non-dual view means we need to be able to relate to space as we point fingers at the problem. That's complicated. But anyway, I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. No, that was interesting. I think, yeah, the only way I relate to it at the moment is sometimes you meet older activists and they do have a bit more of that quality. Like they're there at the meeting, but they have a bit more of a sense of humor, and they can just hold. They seem to hold it a bit with a bit of brevity, while also just being as active. And there's a sense of, even in revolutionary theory, there's a sense of patiently explaining and then being able to let go if people don't understand. Let life teach them, and go on patiently explaining. And so that is the element of patience as well, which I relate to what you're saying as well. And also, I burnt out without a contemplative practice from activism anyway. So my question does come from that place as well.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point, and I think this is a place where Mahamudra and Dzogchen have a tremendous amount of applicability, and this is the replenishment of the practitioner of social justice, or the replenishment of the practitioner who practices this co-emergent practice of non-dual practice and social justice. Like, I think that's the kind of thing that kept me going in chaplaincy too, is to hold space in places of incredible pain and suffering, while also being deeply connected and rooted to primordial purity, right? Buddha nature, ultimate perfection. Which, that in and of itself takes a little bit of time developing a relationship to, especially when we're working to help heal a world that is falling apart. Yeah, it's it's interesting, the complexity of the quote unquote logical extension of the Mahamudra and Ati view leads us into a place that's much more vast than I think, classical ethics can hold. Because we're moving beyond thought, beyond concept, beyond idea, beyond activity. And that is uncomfortable. And I don't think, my gut feeling is, I don't think that most people are necessarily prepared for that. When nothing exists, and it's not to say don't do anything, but when nothing exists, yes, all the work needs to get done, and the clothes need to be washed, and kids need to be fed, and all of that stuff, right? But there isn't the same anger, there isn't the same affectation, there isn't the same depression, there isn't the same isolation, there isn't the same attachment. And again, to Varupa's point, and then I'll be quiet about this, but Varupa said it themselves. We realize that self and others are non-dual, and we aspire to benefit beings. We're bold and fearless in samsara, and we still avoid the slightest negative act. Right? So you can hold the most wild non-dual experience, and you still keep showing up to do the work. So, oh yeah, Richard.
Yeah, listening to this contributes significantly to something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is spiritual bypassing. And it's a relatively new term to me, and my understanding of it has been largely people overriding deeper psychological traumas and imagining that they can dispense with them through spiritual practice. But lately I've been looking at the sort of process of getting to where you're describing, if there's really anywhere to get to, and the thoughts that come up in the course of meditation. There's a huge diversity, right? And some of them are recurrent. And I've found it useful to stop periodically and say to myself, you know, Richard, this happened 40 years ago. And in other words, to give that thought some space to acknowledge what's actually going on and look briefly at the non-Richard component of the whole thing, rather than just assuming that thoughts or interacting with thoughts as something that's completely evanescent and arises and passes away, arises and dissolves. Whereas actually that can be a form of spiritual bypassing on a much more minor level than how it was originally conceived. So I just wanted to sort of put that out there to you, really, and get your reaction to that, because it seems to me that spiritual bypassing is an incredibly useful concept, way more so than I first thought, and that we do it, well, I do it a lot by just dismissing the diversity of thoughts, and that some of them actually are more what's the word for it? They're kind of harder to just allow to dissolve, but it becomes easier to allow them to dissolve if you give them a bit of space and acknowledge what's actually going on, which is various forms of obsession and grasping. And that's all. I just wanted to kind of share my process, really.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. It reminds me a little bit of, I'm probably gonna get this wrong, but within the context of psychology, right? This work of recognizing that I am not my thoughts, right? And like I've known, especially, you know, people who suffer from substance abuse in particular, right? Like, you know, this craving, thoughts of craving, you know, desires around that, the intensity with which this comes, right? And so on one level, perhaps it could be that, oh, you know, I'm just gonna let it go and dissolve, you know. I think that's not necessarily bad. And I know that you're not phrasing this within that context of one thing being, you know, bad. I think it could be less skillful. And I think that this is where, for example, the kind of Vipassana / Lakton component of Hatha Yoga, I'm sorry, of Mahamudra, is helpful, where we begin to recognize that this train of thought activity that keeps coming is not me, right? All of the reactivity that arises as a result of recognizing this feeling or that feeling or this impulse or this pattern, right, is not me. And I think that, you know, the length of time it might take to recognize that is varies, right? And the ease with which some of these larger, because it's kind of like we could say klesha complexes, right? Are processed or aerated or dissolved or resolved. Depends, right? Some of these things might take quite a long time in practice. But I think really to like that point, I think that like a quick superficial read of spiritual bypassing is not helpful. And a quick superficial read of Mahamudra is not helpful. But a slow, deep, penetrating, you know, exploration of Mahamudra and a slow, deep, penetrating exploration of spiritual bypassing is important. And looking at how these things can come together is also important. Because I don't know the extent to which, and I can't speak from the perspective of another culture, but I can speak, you know, as an American. Like the one thing we all want here is I want my problems done yesterday, right? So if that means somebody's like, oh, just, you know, visualize everything being rainbow light and you know, you don't have any problems anymore. It's like prosperity gospel, and you know, no work needs to be done, and it's like, oh, good, I'm all done, right? But when we come to these things around like long-standing fears, right? Anybody who's like a long time, you know, meditation practitioner will be able to recognize particular habit, you know, habitual, we could say habituation around different kind of, you know, dynamics or complexes that re-arise, right? And you could even let them dissolve, but they will come back, maybe not immediately, maybe, you know, not even that week, but they will come back next month or in 2 weeks, right? And so this, I think I think you're right. And I think we need to also be careful of speaking with too much of a crystallized location around even the power of just resting into awareness itself. There is a kind of, or at least I'm convinced of this now, like a direct transmission of their repatterns, the way we relate to phenomena, the more we're able to open up to the direct experience of awareness / rebirth, right? And so this is kind of like darshan with enlightenment. We're sitting, resting, and there is an impact. And so I'm only saying this because I think that we need to be slightly careful about creating too much of a critical statement about the impact of things just dissolving. Because this is the thing, like with creation, completion stage practices, the generation and the dissolution, and generation and dissolution, generation, dissolution, even in the deity practice, has an impact on us, even when we're not necessarily even paying attention to the generation of oneself as a deity and then the dissolution. You know, there is this kind of other work happening within our kind of being that helps to process and settle this. That being said, yeah, we always need to be mindful of the ways that we disengage in our practices. Yeah. Because the same thing could be said for like not even Mahamudra, but like, you know, even if when we're just doing Chinmezi, practice. And I could be a real jerk to all the people around me. And then it's like, oh, now I'll visualize, from a free syllable, my heart, white light begins to arise and I become Chinrezi. And it's kind of like taking a shower. Like I just insulted all these people and hurt this person's feelings and that person's feelings. We're going to confession on Sunday, no offense to Catholics. And then just being like, like I cleansed myself, I did my Hail Marys, and now I'm good to go. Right. So yeah, like in that way, around just assuming this is like Milarepa and the initial like Dzogchen teacher he met before he met with Marpa, where he wasn't ready for that. And so he was just like, yeah, I'm just gonna do nothing during the day, and that's what Hatha Yoga is. I'm gonna do nothing at night because that's what Hatha Yoga is. And the teacher was like, like you clearly don't know what's going on here. You need to go work in a more progressive fashion with Marpa. And whether or not that happened or not, it's a useful dynamic to be pointed out. But absolutely. I mean, spiritual bypassing is good as a term, but I like to maybe be even more direct and maybe call it like blowing smoke up one's own ass practice, right? Because spiritual bypassing makes it seem, too clean. Is that?
Yeah, that's useful, and particularly the reference to creation and completion stage, because I think what I'm trying to get at is a sort of dynamic quality to the practice, which allows the reality to emerge. And I mean, some of the phenomena that arise can be incredibly trivial, but at the same time really persistent. And I've found that they dissolve more easily if being allowed just briefly to exist and reveal themselves as utterly trivial, rather than pretending it doesn't exist, pretending it's not recurrent, that it's just sort of plastering or spackling, as you say in the States, this idea that thought is just one thing and it's all unidimensional and can just be dispensed with by remaining aware, doesn't give due recognition to what's actually going on.
It's interesting though, like, just to, and I mean, I say this because I love you. The other fascinating thing about this is then the Sem-Rigpa relationship, right? And so within the context of the Sem-Rigpa relationship, then, what we begin to see is that this idea of the slow, even purification of mind, right? This is more of a Buddhist concept, right? This is this is kind of like we could say Theravada and Mayan concept. And within the context of definitely Dzogchen and to some extent Mahamudra, even that is too much structure, too much, too much gradual cleaning, right? And so there is, and this is the kind of, thing that makes these non-dual practices of Mahamudra and Dzogchen complicated for people, and complicated as practitioners, is that there are these sudden experiences of the dissolution of the experience of Sem, right? In which all of the neurosis doesn't even, all the air is sucked out. It can't even arise. And then there comes back to this experience of the co-emergence of Sem and Rigpa happening together, right? And in this case, then there's this kind of rather unusual and also very hard for other people to see in other people, the demonstration of the arising of conceptual mind, which can have all of the, foibles of personality and neurosis, but also an interweaving with Rigpa. So a lot of this has to do, why I'm pointing this out is because sometimes we need to check our ideas of what an enlightened person looks like and how they act, right? Because the awakening or realization is not necessarily always commensurate with a mind that is constantly just, and I'm so pure. And I'm like, like bathed in light, this like angel, blah, blah, blah. Right. So sometimes it's a mix. And I've got to find this footnote because I keep referencing it. But in one of Alan Wallace's translations of these 2 volumes of Karma Chagme's Union of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, actually he references, I think it might be a translate, anyways, Gyatso Rinpoche saying that, it's possible for people to realize Mahamudra or Hatha Yoga and have absolutely no qualities that one would assume a master of Mahamudra or Hatha Yoga might have, because there hasn't been the kind of catch up, as it were, of the external qualities of patience, generosity, virtue, all of that stuff. So this is worth considering too, is like our own kind of addiction, I'll go so far as to say, to awakening looking fundamentally positive, or being non-complex.
Right. And also the assumption that there's some causal relationship between the gradual cleaning that you're talking about and some kind of experience of Rigpa, which can just happen utterly spontaneously with no apparent relationship to anything at all.
Yeah. And that's such a coveted experience, and yet can be so terrifyingly destabilizing as well. So this is all very complicated, right? This is not something that's it's not something that is always particularly easy. It's not always something that's particularly easy to stomach in our own experience, let alone watching in others. Okay? And it's also very interesting because, again, we're talking about a tradition that developed in, initially Central Asia, and then, Mahamudra, Indian subcontinent, then moved up to Tibet, Dzogchen, Central Asia, moved up to Tibet, developed there, and then now is being introduced here, where we're beginning to kind of look at its intersection with psychology, with neuroscience, with all these other things. And in some ways, there's really good relationship, and then in some ways, we need to recognize where maybe there is no real relationship. Yeah, you got to throw your hands in the air. Yeah, just because it all looks good because your PhD research makes it seem to fit, doesn't mean it really fits. Well, anyway, thank you all. I need to run and go get the kiddos. So let's take a moment to just very briefly dedicate the merit, dedicating the merit to all beings whose minds are experienced as toxic, inflammatory, bereft of benefit, bereft of qualities. May all beings be able to recognize that their mind is vast, open, primordially pure, luminous awareness. May every practitioner of Mahamudra be able to recognize this quickly, with ease, without effort, and bring countless beings to that state. May all suffering in this world system and all other world systems be dissipated. Take very good care of yourselves, and see you soon.